Elon Musk, a man synonymous with innovation, space travel, and electric cars, isn't just a visionary to the world. He was also a husband, a partner, and a father. But behind the headlines and the groundbreaking achievements lies a story of love, ambition, and the sacrifices that come with being married to a force of nature. In this deeply personal exploration, we'll dive into the life Justine Musk shared with one of the most brilliant yet complex minds of our time. What were the early days of their relationship like before the world knew Elon Musk's name? How did success shape their marriage and ultimately their separation? And what can we learn from her reflections on navigating a life intertwined with genius? Let's step behind the curtain and uncover the human side of an extraordinary partnership. Every great story seems to begin with a spark of the unexpected, and for Justine Musk, meeting Elon was no exception. She was just 18, navigating the hopeful chaos of university life, with no inkling of how her future would unfold. Elon, 19 at the time, entered her life with a mix of intensity and quirkiness that was hard to ignore. He would call her with classical music playing softly in the background, his voice steady, asking her out in a polite, almost old-fashioned way. And every time she declined. This back and forth became a routine, almost predictable, until one day it wasn't. Intrigued more by his persistence than anything else, Justine finally said yes. Elon wasn't like the other young men she'd met. He was serious, determined, and seemed to carry the weight of an entire future on his shoulders. He spoke about the future as though it were a puzzle he was already piecing together, and his certainty was captivating, albeit a little intimidating. Their early days together were a whirlwind of big ideas and simple beginnings. They eventually moved into a modest apartment in the Bay Area, sharing the space with 3 roommates and a miniature dachshund whose disdain for house training was a running joke. Life was far from glamorous, money was tight, and the certainty of their future even tighter. But the struggles brought them closer. Those moments were defined by camaraderie and a shared sense of purpose. Elon's ambition was unlike anything Justine had ever seen. While others talked about changing the world, he was busy mapping out exactly how he would do it. His first company, Zip2, was an extension of his relentless drive and innovative mind. Watching him at work was a spectacle in itself, like observing an orchestra without a conductor, chaotic but somehow cohesive. The energy he brought to his ideas was electrifying, even if it sometimes felt overwhelming. There's a memory Justine shared that perfectly encapsulates those early days. One night, Elon was hunched over their wobbly kitchen table, scribbling furiously in a notebook filled with diagrams and equations. The pages made no sense to her, but they seemed to be a source of endless excitement for him. When he finally looked up, his eyes lit with the kind of enthusiasm that only pure belief can bring. He said, "This is going to work. It has to." His certainty was unshakable, and in that moment Justine realized she wasn't just married to a man. She was married to a force of nature. But as with any force of nature, Elon could be unpredictable. His mind was always racing ahead, 10 steps into the future, and it made him difficult to keep up with. Even during moments when they desperately needed a break, he couldn't switch off. His work wasn't just a passion, it was a consuming fire, and by extension, it consumed their relationship as well. Despite the intensity of their lives, there were moments of lightheartedness that brought balance. Justine once recounted a rare day off they spent at a park. While she admired the scenery, Elon launched into an elaborate explanation of rocket propulsion mechanics. He was so engrossed in the science that he didn't notice her amused glances, a reminder of the blend of exasperation and admiration she often felt. This was Elon, always teaching, always dreaming, always somewhere slightly beyond the present. Living with someone like Elon meant adapting to a world that often revolved around his ambitions. Justine found herself becoming an unofficial participant in his projects, not necessarily because she understood their complexities, but because she understood him. He needed someone who believed in him, someone who could see past the impossibility of his ideas. And so she believed even when it wasn't easy. Their apartment, with its mismatched furniture and perpetually messy kitchen, was a far cry from the luxurious life they would later build together. But in those early days, it was enough. They didn't have comfort or stability, but they had each other, and for a time that was more than sufficient. Justine would later reflect on how those humble beginnings were merely the prologue to a much larger and far more complicated story. Elon's relentlessness drove them forward, but it also meant their lives never stood still. At Zip2, his first venture, he poured himself into solving problems with such intensity that the world outside of work often felt like an afterthought. Late nights turned into all-nighters, and weekends were swallowed whole by brainstorming sessions. Justine admired his drive, but she couldn't ignore the toll it was taking. It wasn't just Elon who was consumed by his work, it was both of them. Even as the company grew and success started to seem attainable, the pressures didn't ease. Instead, they multiplied. Investors, meetings, and the sheer scope of his vision created a whirlwind that became their new normal. Justine stood by him, but there were times she wondered if she was losing herself in the process. Being married to a visionary was both exhilarating and isolating, a paradox she would only fully understand in hindsight. The challenges they faced were deeply personal, yet their story became one of public interest as Elon's ambitions grew. Their relationship was defined by the tension between supporting his dreams and maintaining their connection, a balancing act that grew increasingly difficult. And yet, through all of it, Justine's story serves as a testament to resilience, the complexities of love, and the sacrifices made in the orbit of genius. Living with someone like Elon Musk, as Justine Musk has described, wasn't the kind of life most people imagine when they think of a power couple. His mind never seemed to stop, and because of that, neither did their lives. Weekends were rare, vacations non-existent, and even the moments they might have set aside for quiet togetherness often turned into brainstorming sessions. Elon wasn't the kind of man who could sit still, and while his relentless drive was part of what made him extraordinary, it also made their life together exhausting. When Zip2 began to take off, Justine recounted that their world started to shift. The endless hours and sleepless nights began to pay off, bringing a flurry of investors, expansions, and opportunities. For Elon, this was everything he had worked for, the first tangible step toward his ambitious future. But success, as Justine came to understand, doesn't make life simpler. It makes it infinitely more complex. With every achievement came new pressures, and while their surroundings grew more polished and impressive, the cracks in their relationship started to show. Justine often reflects on the growing tension between them, a tension that wasn't always acknowledged in their conversations. Elon's focus on work became all-encompassing, and while she admired his determination, she felt the weight of navigating a life that had grown increasingly unbalanced. She wanted to support him, to be the partner he needed, but she also longed for a connection grounded in shared experiences, the kind of small, intimate moments that make a relationship feel whole. It wasn't an easy conflict to resolve, so she didn't. Instead, she buried it, holding out hope that things might even out with time. There were bright spots, of course. Justine speaks fondly of those rare moments of connection that reminded her of the man she had fallen in love with. She recalls one particular day when they took an afternoon off, a luxury in itself, to explore a nearby park. As they walked, Elon launched into a passionate explanation of rocket propulsion mechanics, seemingly unaware that she was more taken with the beauty of the trees than the intricacies of engineering. It was a perfect encapsulation of who Elon was, always teaching, always dreaming, always living a few steps beyond the present. As Zip2 grew, so did the demands on Elon's time and energy. Late nights became all-nighters, weekends were devoured by endless meetings, and the boundaries between work and home blurred until they seemed to vanish entirely. For Justine, watching him work was both inspiring and isolating. She admired his unyielding commitment to his goals, but she often felt like she was standing on the sidelines, looking in. The more he poured himself into his work, the harder it became to feel like she was truly part of his world. When Zip2 was eventually sold, it was a transformative moment in their lives. They went from scraping by on ramen noodles to exploring luxury homes in Bel Air, a leap that felt almost surreal. But as Justine notes, success didn't change Elon in the ways one might expect. Despite their new wealth, he remained indifferent to material comforts, sticking to his jeans and t-shirt wardrobe and throwing himself into his next venture with the same relentless energy. The house may have been larger, the surroundings more opulent, but their lives were as frenetic as ever. Wealth, Justine explains, amplified everything: expectations, pressures, and, most notably, the space between them. As Elon shifted his focus to PayPal, the intensity of his work only grew. She admired his drive, but living in his orbit was exhausting. Elon always seemed to be thinking 10 steps ahead, his mind perpetually chasing the next innovation. It was exhilarating at times, but it also left her feeling drained, as if she were trying to keep pace with someone who existed on an entirely different timeline. One evening, she tried to broach the subject of balance, a conversation she recounts vividly. Over dinner, in the stillness of their new home, she asked, "Do you ever think about just stopping for a moment?" His response, she says, was baffling in its simplicity. Stopping wouldn't change anything. If anything, it would make things worse. There's too much to do. It was a statement that perfectly captured Elon's worldview, where time was the enemy, always slipping away faster than he could catch it. As PayPal rose to prominence, so did Elon's profile. Justine reflects on the strange shift that took place during this time, watching as her husband transitioned from a driven entrepreneur to a public figure. Strangers began to dissect his every move, writing about his brilliance and scrutinizing his decisions. While the world saw him as a visionary, she grappled with the feeling of becoming a bystander in their marriage, holding on to the version of him she had known, the man who once wooed her with classical music on the phone. Their home, which had once been a sanctuary, started to feel like another extension of his work. The phone rang at all hours, meetings bled into weekends, and the hum of constant activity became a new kind of silence. It wasn't just Elon's world that was accelerating, hers was too, whether she was ready for it or not. She tried to carve out her own space within the whirlwind, but it was no small task. His focus was so singular, his pace so relentless, that it often felt like there was no room for anything or anyone else. Justine shares a poignant moment that stands out from those years, a rare instance when Elon allowed himself to pause. They were sitting together in their living room, the house unusually quiet. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, and said almost to himself, "Do you ever feel like there's just not enough time?" It wasn't rhetorical. He genuinely wanted to know. For Justine, the problem wasn't time, it was connection. But for Elon, time was the enemy, always slipping away faster than he could catch it. This was the crux of their relationship. As Justine recounts it, the tension between his relentless drive and her longing for connection. It was a dynamic that shaped their lives in profound ways, one that she would continue to reflect on long after their paths diverged. Elon Musk's next venture, SpaceX, began to take shape even before PayPal had reached its full potential. According to Justine Musk, this wasn't just another project or business opportunity, it was an obsession. While Elon had poured himself into Zip2 and PayPal with unrelenting passion, SpaceX felt different. This wasn't just about financial success or technological innovation. It was about legacy. He wanted to push the boundaries of human possibility, to transform space exploration into something tangible and achievable, and he was willing to risk everything to make it happen. Justine recalls reading an interview where Elon stated almost casually that he would risk his entire fortune to get a rocket into orbit. It wasn't something he had mentioned to her directly. She discovered it the same way the rest of the world did, through the media. When she asked him about it later, he shrugged. "It's true," he said matter-of-factly, as though the answer was self-evident. "If we don't do it, no one will." This was Elon Musk at his core, unapologetically driven and unflinchingly committed. Justine admired this about him. It was one of the qualities that had drawn her to him in the first place. But it was also what made their relationship so challenging. Elon wasn't just chasing a dream, he was pursuing something monumental, something so vast and consuming that it often felt incompatible with the life they were trying to build together. The strain between them began to deepen, though neither of them wanted to acknowledge it at first. They remained partners in the most practical sense, still sharing a home and a family, but the emotional distance grew harder to ignore. Justine began to notice how his work consumed him entirely, leaving little room for anything or anyone else. He was building not just a company, but a vision so enormous that it overshadowed everything around it. And as much as she wanted to support him, she started to realize that doing so might come at the expense of herself. She remembers one particularly poignant evening. Elon came home late, exhausted from another day at the office. He sat down across from her, his face marked by weariness in a way she hadn't seen before. "Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" he asked, his voice unusually quiet. It was a rare moment of vulnerability, one that caught her off guard. She answered carefully, "I think you're doing what you believe in." It was the truth, but it wasn't the whole truth. What she wanted to ask in return was, but at what cost? As SpaceX continued to grow, so did the enormity of Elon's ambition. Every conversation seemed to orbit around rockets, trajectories, and the dream of colonizing Mars. For Justine, it was fascinating to see his mind work at such a level, but it also came with a unique kind of isolation. She describes the loneliness of being married to someone whose thoughts were always elsewhere, calculating problems she couldn't begin to understand. Elon cared deeply, in his own way, but his love was often expressed through grand gestures rather than the quiet, grounding moments she longed for. One of those gestures came when he decided their family needed a larger house. Their home in Bel Air was already beautiful, but Elon envisioned something bigger, a place that could accommodate not only their growing family but also the demands of his work. To Justine, it felt like another step further into a life that was becoming unrecognizable. She wanted stability, a sense of groundedness, but stability was always elusive when life revolved around someone as extraordinary and relentless as Elon. The new house was breathtaking, a testament to what sheer determination could achieve. But for all its grandeur, it felt hollow. Justine often describes wandering through the meticulously designed rooms, feeling like a guest in her own life. The silence of the house amplified everything she was trying to suppress: the growing emotional distance, the uncertainty about where she fit in this sprawling new chapter. Meanwhile, Elon thrived on the challenges before him. He had an almost supernatural ability to compartmentalize, moving seamlessly from SpaceX's first launch preparations to the early stages of what would eventually become Tesla. Watching him work was both inspiring and exhausting, a constant reminder of the sheer magnitude of his drive. But even Elon wasn't immune to setbacks. Justine vividly recalls the fallout from one of SpaceX's early launch failures. The disappointment was palpable, weighing heavily on their home that evening. She sat across from him at the dinner table as he replayed every detail of the failed launch in his mind, trying to pinpoint where it had gone wrong. Failure wasn't something he took lightly. It was fuel for him, a reason to work even harder. But while his resilience was admirable, Justine couldn't ignore how it deepened the strain on their relationship. Elon's need to succeed was all-consuming, leaving little room for the emotional connection she craved. The failures weren't confined to SpaceX. They seeped into their relationship. Justine began to feel the distance more acutely. Their conversations grew shorter, more pragmatic, as though they were simply checking items off a to-do list. They were still partners in a technical sense, still cohabiting the same life, but the connection that had once defined their relationship was slipping away. Justine reflects that she often felt like she was competing with something far greater than herself. Not another person, but an entire vision. A legacy Elon was determined to create. Her attempts to bridge the gap often felt futile. She wanted to remind him of the life they had built together, of the shared dreams that once felt so central to their relationship. But more often than not, her efforts felt like they were falling short. For Elon, building companies and solving monumental problems wasn't just his work, it was his identity. And as much as Justine admired that, it was becoming clear that their paths were diverging. Looking back, Justine describes these years as a mix of awe and heartache, watching the man she loved transform into the visionary the world now knows. His brilliance was undeniable, but it came at a cost, one she came to understand only in hindsight. Justine Musk has spoken openly about the complexities of being married to Elon Musk, a man driven by vision and an unrelenting sense of purpose. She recalls the moments when she tried to bridge the emotional gap between them, to remind him of the life they had built together. But it often felt like she was competing with something far greater than herself. Elon wasn't just building companies, he was crafting a vision, a legacy that demanded more from him than anyone else could give. And as much as she wanted to support him, Justine began to realize that doing so couldn't come at the cost of losing herself. One evening, Elon came home after another long night at the office. He sat down across from her, looking more exhausted than she had ever seen him. "Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. It was a rare moment of vulnerability, and Justine was caught off guard. "I think you're doing what you believe in," she responded carefully. It was honest, but it wasn't the full truth. What she really wanted to ask him was, but at what cost? During this time, Justine found herself turning to writing more frequently. Writing became her sanctuary, a way to process the whirlwind of their life together and rediscover parts of herself that had been overshadowed by Elon's larger-than-life presence. Through writing, she found clarity and a sense of purpose that wasn't tied to his ambitions. For the first time in years, she began to reclaim her own identity. Elon noticed the shift in her, though neither of them addressed it directly. Instead, their conversations grew more transactional, focused on logistics and schedules rather than emotions. Justine describes the feeling as if they were two astronauts orbiting the same planet, close enough to see one another but too far to truly connect. It was a painful realization, one that marked a turning point in their relationship. One evening, as they sat across from each other in their expansive dining room, Justine decided to voice what had been weighing on her heart for months. "Do you think this is working?" she asked, her voice quieter than she'd intended. Elon looked at her, his expression unreadable, and after a long pause, he simply said, "I don't know." It wasn't an answer, but it was enough to confirm what Justine had already come to understand. In the days that followed, a quiet and unspoken understanding settled between them. They continued with their daily lives, caring for their children, managing the practicalities of a shared existence. But the emotional foundation of their relationship had irrevocably shifted. Justine reflects on this time as a period of profound distance. They were still living together, but it felt more like they were roommates than partners. Elon's world, as always, continued to expand at an astonishing pace. SpaceX rebounded from its early setbacks, pushing closer to the historic breakthroughs that would make it a household name. Simultaneously, Tesla began to take shape, demanding as much of Elon's focus and energy as his aerospace ventures. For him, failure wasn't an endpoint. It was fuel. Each setback propelled him forward with even greater determination, reinforcing his belief in the path he was carving out for the future. For Justine, however, it was a different story. The cracks in their relationship, once small enough to overlook, had deepened into something impossible to ignore. She had spent years trying to keep up with Elon's relentless drive, trying to be the partner who could stand by his side as he chased dreams that often felt unimaginable. But somewhere along the way, she realized she had lost pieces of herself in the process. The vibrant, ambitious woman she once was had been subsumed by the role of supporting character in Elon's story. And as she reflected on her life, she began to question whether that was a role she wanted to keep playing. One of the hardest aspects of being married to a visionary, Justine explains, is the sense of distance it creates. Elon's mind was always far ahead, focused on solving problems that didn't yet exist for a future that only he could see. It wasn't that he didn't love her or their family. He did, in his way. But his love was expressed through actions rather than words, through providing and achieving rather than quiet, meaningful moments. While Justine appreciated all that he did, she longed for something simpler, a conversation where he was fully present, a moment where the weight of the world didn't feel so heavy. Writing became her lifeline. It allowed her to process the complexities of her life with Elon and to rediscover parts of herself she had set aside during their marriage. It gave her clarity, independence, and a renewed sense of purpose. But even as she grew into this new version of herself, the distance between them continued to grow. Eventually, the conversation that ended their marriage arrived, not with dramatic confrontations or anger, but with quiet finality. One evening, as they sat in their living room, Justine found the courage to say what she had been holding back. "Do you think this is working?" she asked. Elon's response, "I don't know," wasn't a solution, but it was enough. Their relationship had run its course. Looking back, Justine describes their divorce as a reflection of their marriage, complex, deeply emotional, and profoundly human. There were moments of pain and understanding, silences that spoke louder than words, and a shared acknowledgement that their paths were diverging. Elon wasn't one to linger on the past. He was always focused on what came next. And while that sometimes made him feel distant, it was also what made him extraordinary. In the years since, Justine has had time to reflect on what it meant to be married to someone like Elon Musk. She speaks of his brilliance with admiration, recognizing the unique intensity with which he sees the world, not just as it is, but as it could be. But she also acknowledges the challenges that come with such singular focus. Visionaries like Elon live in a world of ideas and possibilities, and while that makes them extraordinary, it can also make them difficult to be close to. When asked if she regrets her time with Elon, Justine's answer is clear: no. Their relationship, with all its complexities, shaped her in ways she continues to uncover. It taught her resilience, the importance of knowing herself, and the strength it takes to stand beside someone while also standing on her own. Her advice to those who admire Elon's path is simple but profound. Don't lose sight of the people who stand beside you. Even the most brilliant minds need connection, grounding, and love. And while that's not always easy for someone like Elon, it's something worth striving for. For Justine, the years since their separation have been about rediscovery. Writing remains her anchor, a way to process her experiences and share them with the world. It's helped her reclaim her voice and reminded her that her own story is just as important as the one she shared with Elon. Their relationship, she reflects, was a paradox, filled with love and challenges, light and shadow. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for that, she is grateful. For Elon, though, the sense of isolation only grew. Even with siblings around, he often felt like he was on his own. The expectations placed on him were enormous. Errol made it clear he was destined to be extraordinary, often reminding him of the Musk legacy, a family tree filled with engineers and leaders who had earned their place through brains and grit. "One day you'll be the best of us," Errol would say. But it never sounded like a prediction. It felt more like a demand. Elon took these lessons to heart, but he also carried dreams that seemed to reach far beyond his father's understanding. As a young boy, he would lie awake at night, staring at the stars outside his window. He dreamed of worlds far beyond the structured, rigid life in Pretoria. A couple of times he tried sharing these dreams with his dad, talking about his desire to change the world. But Errol dismissed them outright. "That's nonsense, Elon," he'd say with a wave of his hand. "Focus on what's real, on what's here." Still, Errol couldn't ignore the spark in his son. He saw in Elon the same resolve and ambition he had in himself. But there was something else, a restless, almost rebellious curiosity that didn't fit neatly within the rules of the Musk household. This tension became even more obvious when Elon started voicing ambitions that went far beyond their privileged life in Pretoria. At just 7 years old, Elon declared to his father, "One day, I'm going to be a millionaire." Errol laughed at first, brushing it off as a child's bold claim, but Elon's unwavering gaze said otherwise. "You'll see," he said with absolute certainty. In that moment, Errol felt a flicker of pride in his son's determination. But there was also a hint of something else, a realization that this boy might actually surpass him someday. To Errol, success was the ultimate measure of a person. It was something he believed he had mastered. And the idea that his young son might one day surpass him created a quiet, unspoken tension. Though he brushed off these feelings, convincing himself that his pride in Elon's potential was pure and free of rivalry, the dynamic between them was shifting. As Elon's ambitions grew, so did the complexity of their relationship. Elon was no ordinary child. While most kids were content to play or follow the rules, Elon needed to know why. He was endlessly curious, driven by an urge to understand how everything worked. When Errol brought home parts from his engineering projects, Elon would sit with him, studying each piece with a focus that seemed beyond his years. At night, he devoured books about engineering, science, and space. Ideas sparked in his mind like stars in the night sky. His hunger for knowledge was boundless, sometimes overwhelming the people around him. One evening, when Elon was just 9, he sat across from Errol at the dinner table, enthusiastically explaining a book he'd just read about rockets. Errol listened, nodding occasionally, but his attention was elsewhere. Mid-sentence, Elon stopped and stared at his father. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice sharp with frustration. Errol was caught off guard, sensing the sting of his son's words. For Elon, it felt like he was operating on a level no one, not even his brilliant father, could fully understand. Moments like this, while rare, planted a subtle distance between them. Errol admired Elon's mind, but he sometimes resented the way his son challenged him. Elon was bold, maybe too bold, and completely certain of himself, something that wasn't always easy for Errol to handle. When a young Elon announced to friends and family that he planned to become the richest man in the world, an older man laughed, taking a long drag on his cigarette. "Dreams are for kids," he said, shaking his head. "You'll learn soon enough." But Elon, with his unwavering gaze, shot back, "I think you're stupid." The room went silent, the guests stunned. Deep down, though, Errol felt a strange, uneasy satisfaction. His son had a mind of his own and wasn't afraid to stand up to anyone, something that was becoming increasingly clear. As Elon grew, his dreams grew with him. He stopped talking about just money and started focusing on ideas that could change the world. He spoke of space exploration, clean energy, and cities on other planets, concepts so massive they both excited and unnerved Errol. Watching his son's vision expand beyond anything he could have imagined left him both proud and deeply unsettled. Elon's path was becoming clear, and it was a path that would lead far beyond anything Errol had envisioned for him, or himself. Some of Elon's dreams seemed like distractions to Errol, who believed they pulled his son away from what really mattered. "Focus on what you can control," he would tell Elon. "The rest is just nonsense." But Elon's mind wasn't so easily tamed. At just 8 years old, Elon's world was turned upside down when his parents' marriage fell apart, leaving cracks that ran deep through his life. The Musk household had always been strict and often cold, but the tension became unbearable as Errol and May's relationship deteriorated. The days that once followed a disciplined, predictable rhythm now felt volatile, disrupted by arguments and an ever-present quiet tension that hung in the air. Even though he was too young to fully grasp the depth of what was happening, Elon sensed it all. He could feel the foundation of his world slipping away piece by piece. The divorce wasn't simple. It was messy, painful, and filled with layers of unspoken hurt. May, with her quiet strength and warmth, had been a stabilizing force in Elon's life. She was a soft counterpoint to Errol's demanding nature. But as the marriage fell apart, May began to pull away, burdened with her own heartbreak. She became distant, leaving Elon feeling lost and overwhelmed by the emotional upheaval. Watching his family break apart left him feeling powerless as the two people he depended on most were torn apart by their differences. When the divorce was final, Elon had a tough choice ahead of him: stay with his mother or live with his father. The decision felt enormous for such a young boy. May offered warmth and comfort, everything he missed, but Elon was drawn to Errol. Perhaps it was his father's strength and drive that appealed to him, or maybe it was the sense that in Errol's world he would have to rise to meet challenges, a path that seemed more in line with his growing ambitions. Or perhaps, deep down, Elon still hoped that by staying with his father, he could finally earn Errol's approval. So Elon made the difficult decision to live with Errol, a choice that would shape his years to come. Life at his father's house was like an education in resilience, but it came at a cost. With May gone, there was no buffer, no gentler voice to soften the harshness of Errol's rules. The Musk household became a place of unyielding standards, and at times, it felt isolating. When the news broke, Elon's response was silence. He pulled away, distancing himself from his father. For someone who had always valued logic and reason, Errol's actions struck a chord in Elon that resonated with both disappointment and anger. He had endured Errol's harsh parenting, the relentless expectations, and the stoic, demanding household. But this, his father's relationship with Haida, felt like a betrayal of everything Errol had once stood for. To Elon, it wasn't just a bad decision, it was a breach of trust. To the outside world, Errol's scandal became the subject of tabloids and gossip columns. But for Elon, it was deeply personal. The public saw only a headline, a strange twist in the life of a controversial figure. But Elon saw a man whose actions seemed to mock everything he'd been taught, everything he believed his father had instilled in him. For years, Errol had preached responsibility, honor, and resilience. But with this one act, he seemed to undermine those very values, leaving Elon feeling like a stranger in his own family. Errol, however, seemed largely unfazed by the public reaction or Elon's disapproval. When asked about his relationship with Haida, he responded with the same bluntness that had marked his entire approach to life. "The only thing we are on Earth for is to reproduce," he told a reporter, brushing off the controversy as though it were a minor nuisance. To Errol, his actions weren't scandalous or deserving of judgment. They were simply choices, expressions of his personal beliefs about life and freedom. But for Elon, these words only deepened the wound. They reinforced the sense that his father's values were fundamentally at odds with his own. The rift between father and son grew wider. How could a man who had imposed such strict expectations on his children make decisions that seemed so reckless and selfish? By now, Elon had moved to America, focused on building his career and the foundation of what would eventually become his empire. In interviews, he rarely spoke about Errol, and when he did, his words were carefully measured, distant. He acknowledged his father's influence, admitting that Errol's intelligence and skills had shaped his own. But there was no warmth in his tone, no sign of admiration. Instead, it was clear that Elon had, in many ways, cut ties with his past, choosing to focus on a future free from the weight of family scandals. Elon was determined to make his own name, to chase his dreams without the shadow of Errol's reputation hanging over him. As Elon's star began to rise, Errol watched from afar, a mixture of pride and quiet pain over the growing distance between them. Elon's work with Zip2, an online city guide platform, had caught the attention of investors, leading to his first major success when Compaq bought the company for nearly $300 million. By the time he was 30, Elon was a millionaire, an enormous leap from the strict, quiet life in South Africa. Errol was stunned and unsettled by the scale of it all. He had always known Elon was intelligent, but watching his son achieve such extraordinary success felt almost like a dream, surreal and bittersweet. The results of Errol's strict parenting were visible to him, the discipline and the resiliency of his children. However, he was not a participant in the story that was taking place. With dreams that were well beyond anything Errol could have ever dreamed, Elon had reached the point where he was financially independent. In the beginning, he was a co-founder of X.com, which was an online payment network that would later evolve into PayPal. This endeavor represented yet another transitional point. A significant amount of media attention began to be drawn to Elon's work. It seemed as though the young South African millionaire with great ideas was suddenly everywhere. He was featured on the covers of magazines and was in the crosshairs of major investors and IT moguls. Elon's fame increased with each new triumph, and the disparity between his life and Errol's got more and more evident as time went on. The manner in which Errol responded to Elon's accomplishments was confusing. On the one hand, he was pleased to witness his son making a difference in the world and constructing things that very few people could possibly fathom. Nevertheless, he had a twinge of envy on the other hand. Errol had once fantasized about the things that he would one day have for himself, including the wealth, the fame, and the groundbreaking enterprises. Now that his son was living that goal, he was surpassing him in ways that Errol could never have imagined. It was such a difficult reality to take in. Errol discovered that he was battling with thoughts of inadequacy, which were emotions that he had never dealt with in a meaningful way before. With each new achievement that Elon accomplished, Errol's life appeared to become less significant in contrast. Errol remained in South Africa, enjoying a more tranquil existence, far apart from the world of creativity that had enthralled Elon. This was during the time that his son was developing technology that would alter entire sectors. Despite the fact that Errol's friends and acquaintances frequently congratulated him on Elon's success, the praises simply served to make the distance between them feel even greater. Errol would smile and nod in response to people's inquiries about what it was like to have a son who had such a significant impact on his life. He would also graciously express his appreciation. But on the inside, he was burdened by the weight of being alone. His influence in Elon's life had diminished to the point that he was merely a bystander, a figure who was relegated to the observer's bench. The celebrity of Elon Musk expanded far beyond the realm of technology when SpaceX successfully launched its first rockets, and Tesla, which had been a struggling electric vehicle startup, began to make ripples in the automotive business. He was no longer merely a visionary in Silicon Valley. Rather, he was rising to the status of a global legend, acclaimed for his ability to challenge the impossible. Errol, on the other hand, experienced a sense of alienation to this newly acquired renown. His son had become a man who was so driven by his aspirations that he appeared to have abandoned his family. He could not recognize the new person that his son had become. The few discussions that they had left Errol with the impression that he was speaking to a stranger, someone who hardly resembled the boy that he had brought up with such great aspirations. It is true that Elon's renown had elevated him to the status of a big figure on a worldwide scale. Nonetheless, Errol had a sense of loss as a result of this transformation. One could no longer empathize with the person that Elon had evolved into, and the life that Errol had once envisioned for his family appeared to be inconceivably far away. When there was a moment of peace and quiet, Errol would think about the decisions he had made and the principles he had attempted to inculcate in Elon. He pondered whether or not his kid had lost interest in him as a result of his strict parenting style, which included his persistent demands for self-discipline and independence. The initial statements that Errol made in public regarding Elon came as a surprise. During an interview, he did not hold back from expressing his disdain of various elements of Elon's life and decisions, which was an unexpected revelation. He referred to Elon's accomplishments as child's play, and although he acknowledged his son's intelligence, his statements were tinged with an evident sense of envy. The comments that Errol offered appeared to be harsh to the world, particularly when considered in light of Elon's immense success and widespread regard. However, these were the only words that Errol could find to explain the complicated feelings of frustration and wounded pride that he was experiencing as he was writing. The significance of SpaceX's accomplishments was minimized by him, and he cast them aside as being of no particular importance. It was his remark that he dismissed the pioneering spirit that had been the driving force behind Elon Musk's endeavors. "People have been sending rockets to space for decades," he said. Equally disdainful of Tesla, he suggested that electric cars were always an apparent next step for the automotive sector. He was also disparaging of Tesla personally. For Errol, Elon's achievements appeared to be nothing more than the most fundamental steps that any ambitious person could have made. However, underneath these criticisms was something more profound, a sense of anguish, the conviction that his son, who was now a hero on a global scale, had abandoned him in some way. The critique that Errol made of Elon in public was not ignored by anyone. The grief that Elon endured as a result of his father's behavior was discussed in a rare and sensitive interview that he gave to Rolling Stone. The emotional toll that Errol's father's harshness had taken on his son was revealed to the world for the very first time. Elon revealed events from his life that had been characterized by his father's harsh and frequently brutal treatment. "He was such a terrible human being," Elon stated, describing scenes from what he had experienced. Elon discussed the profound influence that those early experiences had on him, demonstrating that despite his tremendous success, he had battled with the long-term ramifications of his father's words and deeds. He said that these experiences had a profound impact on him. In the course of the conversation, a picture was created of a man who had attempted, against all odds, to reconcile with his past, but who found that he was repeatedly injured by the same person he had previously looked up to. Both men, in their own unique ways, revealed the secrets that they had kept hidden for such a long time, and their public feud marked the beginning of a difficult new chapter in their relationship. Errol had aged in ways that he had not imagined as the years went by from his perspective. He was 78 years old and had become accustomed to living a life of solitude. His children had become emotionally and physically distant from him, and each day seemed to follow the rhythm of the previous one in a calm and steady manner. His son, who was now a global superstar, had left his father behind as a shadow of the past. Elon, in particular, appeared to be a person from a bygone period. During the course of one evening, Errol was sitting by himself in his modest home when he started to feel the pressure of the years weighing down on him. The photo of Elon when he was younger, with eyes that were brilliant and filled with the spark of determination that had defined him for such a long time, was in a picture frame that he picked up from a side table on the table. In complete quiet, Errol sat there, staring at the picture. His thoughts wandered back to those early days in Pretoria, when his kid had been a young boy with an unquenchable appetite for the world. and an insatiable curiosity about the world surrounding him. He was quite proud of the promise that he saw in Elon, and he had been so proud of it. Indeed, he had exerted more pressure on him than the majority of fathers would have, and possibly even more than he ought to have. Errol, who was 78 years old at the time, peered into those young eyes that were staring back at him from the photograph, and the whole weight of what he had lost became evident to him. The ambition, the desire, and the unrelenting demands had all left wounds and taken their toll on the individual affected. The scars had, over the course of time, gradually worked to weaken their relationship. It was the first time that Errol gave himself permission to recognize the part that he had played in the chasm that had developed between him and his son. It is undeniable that Errol Musk played a big role in kindling Elon Musk's goals, despite the fact that the relationship between the two was complex and frequently traumatic. Elon was inspired to pursue greatness at a young age by Errol's strict and demanding parenting style, as well as by the high expectations that Errol had for his son. In some respects, Errol saw his son's ability and encouraged him to achieve success. However, his harshness and lack of warmth established a foundation of tension and isolation, which resulted in the connection between the two of them being permanently changed. Errol was a firm believer in the importance of discipline, resiliency, and responsibility, all of which he encouraged Elon to develop. In spite of the fact that these characteristics unquestionably played a role in shaping Elon's work ethic and determination, they also resulted in an emotional gap between them. In spite of the fact that Errol's indifference or criticism when Elon sought acceptance may have inspired Elon to demonstrate his worth, it also left him feeling rejected and emotionally disappointed from the experience. It would appear that Errol's tough love, which was intended to prepare Elon for the harsh realities of life, unwittingly spurred his son's determination to succeed, while at the same time contributing to the damaged link that existed between them. It is possible that Errol's failure to acknowledge Elon's more creative and far-reaching objectives, such as exploring space or transforming the world, just served to strengthen Elon's determination to forge his own road, independent of his father's limited perspectives. The emotional scars that were left by that indifference may have been a catalyst for Elon's later issues with personal connections and his complicated sense of identity. Although the early lack of emotional connection between them most certainly created a desire in Elon to prove himself, the emotional wounds that were left by that indifference may have been used as a catalyst. Errol's actions, which were driven by his own pride, discipline, and hard standards, were crucial in driving Elon toward greatness, despite the fact that they came at a high emotional cost. In the end, it is possible that Errol did not purposefully try to mold Elon's enormous dreams.